Hello and welcome back to Spiritual Fertility. I am your host, Alison Bucklin, and I am so blessed and grateful to have another inspiring and empowering guest to bring to you today. And I am going to start first by reading a little bit about my guest. We happen to come across each other's paths in a Facebook group of all things several years ago, about 4 years ago. And I've been following her journey on social media and just kind of seeing what she's up to, and have always been interested and intrigued by her touch on spirituality and what she does for work, and her travels along the way and her life transitions. But recently she made a Facebook post that really kind of hit me in a place where I was like, I need to reach out and see if she would come on and be a guest, because there's aspects of her story and her life that I know those who are listening will be able to relate to, and certainly things that I can relate to. So we want to set the intention and bring forth the intention for this episode, which is that of support and reaching out for support when you feel you need it. And there are times when we can have group support. There are times where we may need support in our life. Both of us have a parallel story of drawing in and having support in the line of hiring a coach to help work with us, which also seemed to be for both of us a turning point in our spiritual awakening and in our transition and rebirth in our life. So, Devin Roscillo, did I pronounce that right, Devin?
You did.
Okay, great. Devin Roscillo. So, her post here, she is a certified ADHD coach and licensed speech language pathologist. And a little more quietly, she's a Reiki practitioner and freelance model. And she helps college students with ADHD go from functioning to thriving in their academic and personal worlds. And I'll let her talk a little bit more about that. But Devin has bipolar and ADHD, and since 2018, she has been writing a mental wellness blog where she chats about both the challenges that show up as a neurodivergent person and about the blessing that it has been. And she really likes to encourage people to see their diagnoses as something that shaped their resilience, strengths, and grit. And so we'll be sure to share a link to her blog and everything about her. She likes building community, and she seeks to want to build a community that is more in person. So we'll talk about where she lives. You never know, if you are listening to this, if that may be something that you want to connect with Devin about. In 2021, she got divorced, and she felt like that set her life back a hell a lot. But 3 years later, she's learned that honoring her true needs by getting divorced, and that she could live a more authentic life because of it. So we are going to talk more about that. Oh, here's something. She's obsessed with rescue dogs and has fostered 16 dogs, from 8-week-old puppies to 7-year-old surrendered dogs. And I'd align with that. I mean,
Mhm.
all creatures, right? A
Mhm.
way to connect. And I can't wait to get in and learn more about Devin. So, Devin, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody who's listening and talk really about how you came to be where you are today? We'll expand on what you do and all of those things, but I'd love to hear more about you and the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Allison, first of all. And that is such a big question. What brought me to where I am today? But I'm excited to answer it. So I am Devin Roscillo. I am an ADHD coach. I'm a speech pathologist. I am an empowered woman. I'm a model at times. I haven't modeled in a while, so maybe we'll just throw that one out. But I have modeled. It was really fun, and I did it for personal expression and creativity, and just actually getting more in tune with my authentic self, like you said earlier. Um, Yeah, so much has brought me to where I am today. We could talk mental health, we could talk, there's so many different avenues, but I'm just happy to be here and be able to share my story.
Absolutely. Well, let's start at a huge turning point in your life
Mhm.
and where you share with me that you had hired a coach that helped you. So let's take it back to, when did you say you had that big turning point? That was in 2020, correct?
Right.
Yeah, so share a little bit
Yeah.
about that and the work that you did.
Yeah. So what actually in 2020, this was May 2020, what actually led me to hire the coach that I worked with for, I think, 6 months was I was on a regular drive one day going to pick up a breakfast sandwich with my dogs in the car. And I came to an intersection where there was train tracks and there was a stoplight. And it was just very stupidly engineered. You could stop on the train tracks, and that's accidentally what I did. Um, and what happened was I was just sitting at the light waiting for it to turn green, and I noticed that the gates to the train tracks started closing around my car. And I heard a train horn coming. And fortunately, I was really, really lucky. I was able to reverse my car in time, and the train passed within like a second after I got off the tracks. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it was such a terrifying, like life altering moment for me, because I started bawling my eyes out after it happened. And I drove right home and opened my journal, which is something that I do very regularly. And the first words that I wrote on the paper were, "You're not living an authentic life." And authenticity was one of my key principles. And I knew immediately that that was tied to my marriage, that I wasn't living an authentic life within my marriage. And that is what led me to hire the coach, the spiritual coach that I worked with, who helped me figure out that I was not in a marriage that was meant for me, and that it was time to move forwards with my life in a different direction, so that I could honor myself and live a more authentic life.
Wowee.
Yeah, I
Talk
didn't tell you
about
that
like,
before.
yeah, talk about a intersection, right, of life that
Yeah.
really caused you to kind of wake up to that moment. And you're big on journaling. I know you've mentioned it,
Mhm.
and you have your blog. So you hired your coach and you
Mhm.
started the process of divorce. I mean, that's a huge transition. Where were you
Mhm.
living at the time?
I was living in Texas, which is where I had moved with my ex-husband, because his family was from Texas. So I was there for a year and a half before we started the divorce, and then moved shortly after because Texas just wasn't it for me.
Yeah. So where'd you move to after Texas?
So I moved to Los Angeles, which is exactly where I've always wanted to live. And so that was a really, really amazing experience for me to, it was actually very serendipitous and definitely not a coincidence, I think, is that um, I had filed for divorce probably like, I think it was probably about 6 months or so that it took. But I had filed for divorce like 6 months earlier and planned this move to Los Angeles, and the divorce came through completely via email because it was COVID time, so we didn't even have to go to court. The divorce came through via email 2 days before my move to Los Angeles. So it was like the universe saying, this is your fresh start. Like this is your time to really make a path for yourself. So that was very symbolic and really amazing for me.
Yeah. And then moving forward, you are on this path to choose authenticity, right? I mean,
Mhm.
to live that authentic life and be true to
Yeah.
you. That's so important in the work that we do. And in your introduction, I talked about your diagnosis. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about living with bipolar, first and
Mhm.
foremost? And then I really want to have a conversation about ADHD as well. So if you wouldn't mind
Yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah. So I consider myself very fortunate in that I was diagnosed with bipolar when I was 10, which most people are not diagnosed that young. So I, from a very, very young age, knew what was going on. Um, and because I was seeing psychiatrists that early on and therapists that early on and stuff like that, I was a very self-aware child and a very self-aware and became a very self-aware adult. And I think that really helped me in my experience with bipolar. But bipolar is a scary thing. I choose to be medicated because I think that's what works for me, but it's not everyone's choice or preference. Um, and when I'm on the wrong medications, which I have been in the past, it's scary because it's a lot of really big, big, big emotions. And it's really draining because of how big those emotions are. So for me, I'm bipolar. I fluctuate between manic and depressive, or hypomanic and depressive. Hypomanic is just like less extreme than a manic episode. Um, and I fluctuate, but I'm on controlled meds and I don't really experience those fluctuations much anymore because I finally landed on something that really works for me. But when I wasn't, it was really, really a tough time. It was really draining and really confusing and exhausting. But like I said, because I found out at such a young age, I gained so much self-awareness, and I consider that to be like a really big blessing. Yeah. Hope you don't have audio, Allison.
There we go. I'm back.
Okay.
I can see, I thank you. I can see how that self-awareness,
Mhm.
I mean, I just see that connecting the dots to that self-awareness to know, like, after you get back and you journal from your train tracks and the first thing you write, I mean, to me, self-awareness is really the key to everything, like
Yeah.
understanding ourselves and moving forward.
Right.
And yeah, thank you for sharing that. Now,
Hmm.
you also have been diagnosed with ADHD, and we were talking a little bit beforehand. Now, I haven't been diagnosed with ADHD, but
Hmm.
I have had mental health challenges for a very long time, really as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Mostly anxiety, but I'd say in maybe like the last year or so, I've started seeing people that I follow and that I pay attention to come out and share a little bit more about their own adult ADHD diagnosis and maybe just some of the symptoms that they've experienced. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's what it is. Like I've seen myself and understood that I've been easily distracted
Yeah.
and moving from one thing to the next to the next. And now I am more present because of the work that I've done on myself. I am more present and grounded and use different
Hmm.
tools to do so. So talk a little bit about, and now you're a certified ADHD coach. So talk a
Hmm.
little bit about, when you discovered that and also how, maybe a little bit of education on what kind of signs and symptoms somebody can think about and pay attention to, and maybe some tools with how to manage it.
Right. Yeah. So for me, ADHD has presented or presents with a lot of starting and stopping and a lot of creativity, and a lot of difficulty starting. And those are like my main uh symptoms, I guess. And those are the main things that really cue me in to where I can say like, "Ooh, I'm having a really hard time starting something today. I know I'm having a really hard day, and today's not the best ADHD day." Um, but some things that you might look for are just like I said, like starting and stopping projects, being a really creative person, but not always following through, distractibility, that acts like people will call them like careless mistakes. I don't really like the word careless, but like making mistakes easily. There's so many things, like lack of organization, having a hard time planning and problem solving. So many things to look out for. You could always just kind of Google, I love to refer to Google. It should never be Dr. Google. I think people use it that way. But you can always Google just like symptoms of ADHD if you're curious to find out like kind of where you fall, if maybe you need to see a psychiatrist and look for a diagnosis. But and then what was the last part? Some support, right? Some tips. One thing that helps me immensely and helps my clients that I work with is body doubling, which is when you and another person are either in the same room together or on Zoom together, and you're simultaneously both working on something separately. So this strategy called body doubling works really, really well for people with ADHD because it gets us in work mode. And we're a mirror image of each other, essentially, right? So, like for me, with my clients, sometimes I'll do body doubling co-working sessions together with them, because they just simply need another person next to them, to actually get through their work. It's as simple as that sometimes, just needing the presence of someone else. Um, so that's one tip is if you can set yourself up with support system like a friend or an ADHD coach or a parent if you're younger, or even a grandparent. Who knows? If you can set yourself up with a friend or whomever to sit next to you while you fold your laundry, that can be really supportive to a person with ADHD.
Wow, that's amazing. I've never heard of that before. I mean, I've seen different like working groups or I was a part of a company one time and it was like a get together on Zoom and everybody do your own project, right? And do
Mhm.
it. I can see how that can be, because I always thought that I was a procrastinator. I gave myself that label, right? But it was going back to figuring out ADHD kind of symptoms for me. Like wasn't really that I was a procrastinator, is going back to what you said. It was like I couldn't start something, right? Until it
Mhm.
was like, the deadline right there. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And how did you
Yeah.
come to work with college students and why college students?
Yeah. By college students. So I contract with a mental health company in the area locally. And I was at the time doing mostly mindfulness coaching and had done a little bit of studies on ADHD, but there was a client that came through, a college age student that came through that practice that wanted to work with me. And I decided to try it out, and I just really enjoy that age. I think that there's so much work to be done in like your teens and early 20s, that can set someone up for a really successful adulthood. So yeah, that age has been really working with that age has been really rewarding because I think of all the things that I could have done better or differently when I was in college and all the help that I needed back then when ADHD wasn't really a thing. Um, and I'm happy to just be able to provide that service to people now that we do have access to this.
Yeah, it is. And
Yeah.
if I think the earlier we can start to gain self-awareness,
Hmm.
I didn't I didn't find myself on the like I'm self-aware. I'm becoming to learn about myself really until I mean very much later in life when I learned about like what my strengths were or got into some of the spiritual practices that really
Hmm.
kind of bring about a lot of self-awareness. But I think the earlier we can become self-aware about the things that impact us, the better. And
Yeah.
and that's such a great age because it's such a pivotal time to
Mhm.
transition and you're like given so much pressure, right? I
Yeah.
mean, whether that's from societal or familial or different
Yeah.
outsides, how we can be influenced. But it's a blessing that you're being that support person for that
Mhm.
age. I think that's amazing.
Thank you. And that's also just additionally the age where people with ADHD really start to slip and really struggle is because when they go from high school to college, that transition can be really, really hard for them. because all your support goes away. All your schedules and structures and supports go away, and it's all on you. And sometimes people at that age just don't have the skills necessary to plan and organize and manage their time as well as they need to. And that's where, ADHD coaching can come in, and other avenues too. So I just wanted to share that. It's such a pivotal time, like you said.
Yeah, really it is. And yeah, I want to touch on too a little bit that we were talking about is your spiritual evolution. And I
Mm.
cannot wait for you to share, some of the stories and the parallels that come with a spiritual awakening, or like not necessarily parallels, but like that fine line between awakening and mental health. So
Mhm.
talk a little bit about your spiritual awakening.
Mhm. Yeah, so, um, also in 2020, as I was starting to go through my divorce, I hired a spiritual coach, and she helped me learn how to meditate, and she helped me learn how to, harness and trust my intuition, and so many things that we worked on together that were really great. And that's when I started to really see my spirituality expand and my intuitive gifts. And it was a really, really amazing and cool time. And also, in hindsight, kind of a scary time at the same time, because I have bipolar. So I wasn't really always sure what is intuition and what is bipolar. And that was a really hard thing for me to figure out. And a really hard thing for me to just understand. So I remember asking my coach that question one day, and she said something that really makes a lot of sense. And she said, intuition is running to something or running towards something, and bipolar is running away from something. Um, and that just made so much sense to me and was really helpful in while I was trying to figure everything out. Figure everything out, like a divorce and where I was moving, and what I was supposed to be doing with my life, and then what's the next step in my business, and who am I really, if not a wife, and all those things. It was all happening at the same time. So um yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
You did, you did. And yeah, I would love for you to share. I mean, because sometimes we can get those nudges or downloads or visions or different like clairs,
Mhm.
clairaudience, we can hear something, clairvoyance, we can see something, claircognizance. That seems to be my strong one. I just know things. And that's a hard one because I just know, like there's no proof in it. I just
Right.
know that that's my intuition. I feel it. But
Yeah.
you've moved quite a lot,
Mhm.
and I know you received some guidance that you followed. Talk about the vision that came about to you.
Yes. So actually, well, I'll tell you about two because I didn't mention one earlier. When I was just starting to embark on my spiritual journey, I was meditating one day, and I was planning a trip from from Texas to Arizona. Um, and in my meditation, this is probably the first time that I had ever heard or seen anything in a meditation. But I heard the words "don't go" and saw flashing police lights in like my visual field. And I was like, "Oh my God, this must be the universe telling me like you're going to get in a car accident if you drive on this trip or something, or don't go because we need to avoid you getting hurt." And so I listened, and then and then a week later, I was stubborn and I went and I got in a car accident. I didn't tell you that because I forgot about that part.
No.
Yeah, so I actually, um, yeah, I made it like 5 hours away, and then two deer ran in front of my car, in front of like a blind. I was just reaching the top of a hill in the middle of the West Texas desert at night. So it was very scary, but I didn't listen to my intuition, and that was like a key moment for me that reminded me, like, hey, you know what's up, just listen. Even if it's not something you want to hear. That was something that I really learned back then, is like, even if it's not something that you want to hear, listen anyway, because your intuition's guiding you in the right direction anyway. So yeah, so that was one thing that I wanted to share with you. And then the other vision that I received, or message that I received, this was in like March 2020, or no, February 2021. I was meditating because I was trying to figure out where I was going to move next. So I really didn't like living in Texas, and I was thinking, okay, I'll move back to the East Coast and be near family, and nothing seemed right. I was thinking for like months, where was I going to move back to the East Coast? And finally I meditated on it, and what popped into my head was Los Angeles. And I was like, what? I've never wanted to live in Los Angeles. I've always wanted to live in San Diego. Why would I move to Los Angeles? It's just trafficy. And sure enough, the guidance sure enough, the guidance was, because if you move to San Diego, it's going to be really easy for you and you're going to settle down and it'll be very simple. But if you move to Los Angeles, you'll be challenged and you're ready for another challenge. And so I moved 3 weeks later.
Wow.
Yeah,
Isn't it funny how we can argue with ourselves?
right? I do it
We
so
can like
much.
right, we can have this like conversation. No, wait, why should I do it? Why would I ever do that? And but what keeps coming up to me is trust.
Yeah.
Trusting in ourselves. I mean, we do this work, we're on this journey, we're on this path, and oftentimes we cannot trust the guidance that we're
Mhm.
receiving. And then we get kind of signs that really set us back on the right path. I mean, we don't know the how, right?
Yeah.
We're just having the why. Like, why are we doing what we are doing? Like, living in our values and in our truth and in our authenticity. I mean, trying our best, right? In this
Yeah.
earth school. Every time I hear the earth school reference, I'm like, yes, yes, this 3D earth school, it's not for the faint of heart, for sure. And I can realize too that relate about like the spiritual awakening and visions and things being scary, because
Mhm.
when you do have that line of mental health, it can be scary at times, but that darkness is also there so that we can infuse light to guide us even further on our path. And I love how you followed that intuition that you
Mhm.
received during your meditation and didn't take the easy road and listened that time and went to Los Angeles and found yourself, you know, evolving even further and on a
Yeah.
challenge, and you met your partner.
Yes. Yes, I did. Yeah, we met in Los Angeles, and at both of our favorite place, where I used to go journal and read all the time, and we kind of circled each other for like 9 months before finally meeting. And the rest is history. And it turned out, which I don't think is a coincidence, that his family also lived on the East Coast, like only an hour and a half from my family. So we both moved back to Connecticut, to be closer to our families, and it worked out so perfectly. But I'm pretty sure, like, I feel very strongly that the reason I moved to LA was really to explore, myself and live more authentically, but also to meet him. So I'm really glad
Yes.
that I made that decision.
Yeah, right. I mean, that hindsight and that perspective is really everything. And
Yeah.
before we were talking, also, I want to bring up some things that you mentioned about realizing some of the signs that you were in tune with yourself and in
Oh
touch
yeah.
and your spiritual. I mean, you're an empath, right? You can
Mhm.
pick up on others' feelings and be mindful of that. But as a child, you were sharing that you were sensing and reading auras.
Mhm. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, I don't remember it much, but I remember my mom always telling me that I used to see auras as a kid. And I do remember, always just being able to sense people's emotions and challenges and stuff. And like, as I got older, when I, had a cell phone, I could not talk to a friend for 3 months, and I would text them and know exactly something was going on, something challenging was going on with them. And they'd be like, yeah, I actually am having a hard day. How did you know that? I'm like, I don't know. I just knew it. Um, yeah, it was really, really, really interesting to be so in tune without knowing I was in tune. And my coach, when I was working with her, is the person who pointed that out. She was like, "You just describe everything you've just described to me. You're an empath. That's just who you are." And that's when I started learning about being an empath and spirituality and everything.
Yeah, right. I
Yeah,
know. And once we hear it and we put the pieces together, we're like, oh, yes,
it
that's
makes so much
what I
sense.
am. Right. It does make so much sense.
Yeah.
As I've continued to learn about being an empath and where to have boundaries and
Mhm.
create those energetic boundaries, but also learning how to thrive as an empath. I read a little passage every day about, ways to thrive as an empath
Mhm.
and to kind of use that. I mean, it all comes from self-awareness, going back to, right, coming back to self-awareness and understanding ourselves better, and for
Yeah.
sure. And yeah, so I would love, I really appreciate everything that you've shared in our conversation now, but I want to talk a little bit and hear from you what your future vision is for yourself, because international speaker and author, and yeah, share a little bit about that.
Yes, I would love to. Put me on the spot with this one. I love
Uh-huh.
it.
Yeah, well, we put it out there, right?
I
Exactly.
know
I
we
mean, if
have
it's
to,
on your heart,
exactly.
right? If it's on your heart, right? It's meant to be shared, and
It is meant to be
you never
shared.
know what seeds are
Mhm.
planted. And so yeah, so you love to speak to others and to young people and to, yeah,
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that so our listeners can understand.
I'm going to read to you because this is something that I have posted on my wall. It's my vision and my mission. And my vision is to author inspiring books and speak on stages internationally, inspiring the masses. And my message is that we all have the ability to get back up no matter how many times we get knocked down. Resilience may not always look the same, but it is always within you, ready to be called upon at any time. So that's what I want to be doing. I want to be speaking on stages, and I want to be writing books and inspiring youth and people who struggle with adversity and mental health difficulties. Um, and let them know that they are resilient, even if it doesn't look the same from person to person. They have it within them.
I'm getting chills, and
Oh,
that was so beautiful. And it's
you.
definitely in your future, and
Thank
for
you.
sure. And yeah, and I know there's going to be a lot more stepping stones on your journey,
Mhm.
and where you will find yourself being the person who provides support, because
Mhm.
we are support for so many others on their
Right.
path, but also finding ways to call in support as well when you need it. And it kind of just brings us full circle to the intention that we did come
Yeah.
up with and set was, that being supportive to each other. I mean, we're women, we've had, mental health challenges, and
Mhm.
have resilience in our body and in our blood and in our spirit. And I really appreciate you coming on with me and sharing and having this conversation. And yeah, I look forward to continue to observe your vision and see it come to fruition. And we will be sure to share all of your info in the show notes, so anybody who's listening would feel free to reach out to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison. This was so nice. I'm really glad we got to reconnect, and this was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I so appreciate it. And for anybody who's listening, please like and subscribe and follow Spiritual Fertility, the podcast. This is also on YouTube as well, under Spiritual Fertility. And leave a review while you're there so we can reach more women who are on their path, on their fertility path. Oh, one more thing before we go. I asked about fertility. It wasn't
Yes.
something that you ever pictured for yourself, but now
Right.
you are starting to realize that you would like a family one day. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really necessarily want kids for the longest time. I think I did until I was like in my 20s, and then from like 20 to 30 I didn't want kids, and then I met my partner now, and it just like, I don't know how to describe it. It just makes sense in the best way. Um, so yeah, I want a family with him. I think that sounds
Mm.
great.
So beautiful. Yes, that
Thank
little
you.
seed is there and
Yeah.
exciting, so exciting. Well, thank you so much again and thank you to everybody who's listening and we will talk to you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Allison.